This high consummation of the yoga will at once solve, or rather it will wholly remove and destroy at its roots the problem of action. Human action is a thing full of difficulties and perplexities, tangled and confused like a forest, with a few more or less obscure paths cut into it rather than through it. But all this difficulty and entanglement arises from the single fact that man lives imprisoned in the ignorance of his mental, vital, and physical nature. He is compelled by its qualities and yet afflicted with responsibility in his will, because something in him feels that he is a soul who ought to be what now he is not at all, or very little, master and ruler of his nature. All his laws of living, all his dharmas, must be under these conditions imperfect, temporary and provisional, and at best only partly right or true. His imperfections can cease only when he knows himself, knows the real nature of the world in which he lives, and, most of all, knows the eternal, from whom he comes, and in whom and by whom he exists. When he has once achieved a true consciousness and knowledge, there is no longer any problem. For then he acts freely out of himself and lives spontaneously in accordance with the truth of his spirit and his highest nature. At its fullest, at the highest height of this knowledge, it is not he who acts, but the divine, the one eternal and infinite who acts in him and through him in his liberated wisdom and power and perfection. Man in his natural being is a sattvic, rajasic and tamasic creature of nature. According as one or other of her qualities predominates in him, he makes and follows this or that law of his life and action. His tamasic, material, sensational mind, subject to inertia and fear and ignorance, either obeys partly the compulsion of its environment and partly the spasmodic impulses of its desires, or finds a protection in the routine following of a dull, customary intelligence. The rajasic mind of desire struggles with the world in which it lives and tries to possess always new things, to command, battle, conquer, create, destroy, accumulate. Always it goes forward tossed between success and failure, joy and sorrow, exultation or despair. But in all, whatever law it may seem to admit, it follows really only the law of the lower self and ego, the restless, untired, self-devouring and all-devouring mind of the asuric and rakshasic nature. The sattvic intelligence surmounts partly this state, sees that a better law than that of desire and ego must be followed, and erects and imposes on itself a social and ethical, a religious rule, a dharma, a shastra. This is as high as the ordinary mind of man can go, to erect an ideal or practical rule for the guidance of the mind and will, and as faithfully as possible observe it in life and conduct. This sattvic mind must be developed to its highest point, where it succeeds in putting away the mixture of ego motive altogether, and observes the dharma for its own sake, as an impersonal social, ethical or religious ideal. The thing disinterestedly to be done solely because it is right. Kartavyam karma. The real truth of all this action of Prakriti is, however, less outwardly mental and more inwardly subjective. It is this that man is an embodied soul, involved in material and mental nature, and he follows in it a progressive law of his development, determined by an inner law of his being. His caste of spirit makes out his caste of mind and life, his swabhava. Each man has a swadharma, a law of his inner being, which he must observe, find out, and follow. The action determined by his inner nature, that is his real dharma. To follow it is the true law of his development. To deviate from it is to bring in confusion, retardation, and error. That social, ethical, religious, or other law and ideal is best for him always, which helps him to observe and follow out his Swadharma. All this action, however, is even at its best subject to the ignorance of the mind and the play of the gunas. It is only when the soul of man finds itself that he can overpass and erase from his consciousness the ignorance and the confusion of the gunas. It is true that even when you have found yourself and live in yourself, your nature will still continue on its old lines and act for a time according to its inferior modes. But now you can follow that action with a perfect self-knowledge and can make of it a sacrifice to the master of your existence. Follow then the law of your Swadharma. Do the action that is demanded by your Swabhava, whatever it may be. Reject all motive of egoism, all initiation by self-will, all rule of desire, until you can make the complete surrender of all the ways of your being to the Supreme. And when you are once able to do that sincerely, that will be the moment to renounce the initiation of your acts without exception into the hands of the Supreme Godhead within you. Then you will be released from all laws of conduct, liberated from all dharmas. The divine power and presence within you will free you from sin and evil and lift you far above human standards of virtue. For you will live and act in the absolute and spontaneous right and purity of the spiritual being and the divine nature. The divine and not you will enact his own will and works through you, not for your lower personal pleasure and desire, but for the world purpose and for your divine good and the manifest or secret good of all. Inundated with light, you will see the form of the Godhead in the world and in the works of time. Know his purpose and hear his command. Your nature will receive as an instrument his will only, whatever it may be, and do it without question, because there will come with each initiation of your acts from above and within you an imperative knowledge and an illumined assent to the divine wisdom and its significance. The battle will be his the victory, his the empire. This will be your perfection in the world and the body, and beyond these worlds of temporal birth, the supreme eternal superconsciousness will be yours, and you will dwell forever in the highest status of the Supreme Spirit. The cycles of incarnation and the fear of mortality will not distress you, for here in life you will have accomplished the expression of the Godhead, and your soul, even though it has descended into mind and body, will already be living in the vast eternity of the Spirit. This then is the supreme moment, this complete surrender of your whole self and nature, this abandonment of all dharmas to the divine, who is your highest self, this absolute aspiration of all your members to the supreme spiritual nature. If you can once achieve it, whether at the outset or much later on the way, then whatever you are or where in your outward nature, your way is sure and your perfection inevitable. A supreme presence within you will take up your yoga and carry it swiftly along the lines of your Swabhava to its consummate completion. And afterwards, whatever your way of life and mode of action, you will be consciously living, acting and moving in him, and the divine power will act through you in your every inner and outer motion. This is the supreme way because it is the highest secret and mystery, and yet an inner movement progressively realizable by all. This is the deepest and most intimate truth of your real, your spiritual existence.